It was a warm and peaceful Friday evening in the suburbs where 16-year-old Kate lived. Left alone in the house while her parents, Jim and Laura, went to a late-night play, Kate expected to spend the evening in cozy silence, enjoying movies and snacks. She had let her two dogs, Rex and Lily, out into the backyard, where they usually ran and played until late. But the calm was quickly interrupted. First, Kate heard Rex's persistent barking, mixed with Lily's nervous whimpering. The sound was so sharp and unsettling that Kate quickly went to the kitchen window to figure out what was going on. Her heart began to race as she saw both dogs staring into the backyard with tension and fear. Kate looked out the window and froze in terror. In the backyard, where there was usually peace, a dark figure was moving across the lawn. A tall person, with a shadowy silhouette, moved confidently, as if surveying the area. The moon, barely visible through the clouds, cast a faint light, making the figure even more menacing. Kate noticed the person frequently glancing around, as if expecting to be noticed. She covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming in fear. Thoughts raced through her mind. What should I do? What are his intentions? Could it just be some random passerby? But deep down, she knew this wasn't just an ordinary person strolling through the neighborhood. Rex and Lily kept barking, signaling that something was very wrong. Their frightening barking became almost unbearable. Kate approached the door, hoping it was just some prank or someone teasing the dogs. She reached for the door handle, but suddenly noticed the figure moving toward the front entrance. Her heart continued pounding, and fear gripped her completely. As she reached the front door, her eyes widened in horror. She realized it wasn't locked, as she had thought. In a panic, she quickly turned the lock, ran back to the kitchen, and grabbed her phone. As she waited to connect with the operator, her eyes stayed fixed on the figure, now standing at the front door, pounding loudly. Each knock felt like a hammer hitting her nerves. Then the figure began shouting, "Open the door. I know you're in there." His voice was harsh and threatening, and the fear held Kate in its grip. She didn't know how to react. Should she scream, run, or just pray that someone would hear her? Trying to keep her composure, Kate, her voice trembling, began explaining the situation to the operator. "Help, someone is trying to get into our house. I saw him in the backyard, and now he's banging on the door." She barely managed to say, her words breaking between sobs. As soon as Kate finished her plea, the sound of loud knocking echoed through the house. The absence of any other noise made it even more terrifying. Each knock felt like a warning, sending chills down her spine. The person at the door began speaking through it, his voice so clear and menacing that it made Kate's hair stand on end. "Open the door, now." In desperation, Kate moved to the window overlooking the yard and peeked outside. Through the semi-transparent glass, she saw the silhouette of the figure. He was about 6 feet tall and dressed in dark clothing, making him almost invisible in the night. She noticed the figure pause at the door for a moment before resuming the banging, as if hoping the door would eventually give way. Kate glanced out the window again and saw the figure now trying to force the door open, pushing against it with his shoulder, acting as if he was ready to break the lock. Not waiting for the police to arrive, Kate instinctively moved toward a closet, trying to hide and remain completely silent. Inside the closet, her hands continued to shake, and her breathing became more shallow. She could hear the figure still pounding on the door, and her fear only intensified. Every movement, sound, and even the faint beams of light sneaking through the cracks in the door felt ominous. Kate looked at her phone again, praying that the police would arrive as soon as possible. As she sat in the darkness of the closet, her mind filled with panic, and the fear for her life and the lives of her parents became unbearable. After what felt like an eternity to Kate, the sound of sirens finally echoed through the house, and the headlights of a patrol car illuminated the front yard. Still hiding in the closet, Kate felt some of the tension ease as she saw that the police had arrived. She cautiously stepped out of her hiding place and glanced at the clock. Time had crawled by painfully slow. Soon, 2 police officers, Officer James Rogers and Officer Melissa Kim, entered the house, their heavy boots leaving marks on the carpet. They began by checking each room, carefully listening for any noise and searching for signs of an intruder. Kate, still trembling and in shock, came out of her room when the officers called her. She quickly explained what had happened, the figure in the backyard, the knocking on the door, and the threats. The officers listened intently and got to work. Officer Rogers went outside to inspect the property, following some tracks that led to the backyard. He found a few footprints leading toward the fence and noticed broken branches, suggesting someone had possibly tried to climb over it. However, despite his efforts, there was no evidence to identify the intruder. Meanwhile, Officer Kim continued her search inside the house, checking each door and window to ensure no other potential entry points had been damaged or left open. She also questioned Kate again to gather more details and document her statement. When the officers regrouped with Kate, their faces showed both sympathy and professionalism. Officer Rogers looked at Kate and said, "We checked the area, but unfortunately, the intruder is gone. We found a few footprints, but nothing concrete. This could be a prank by teenagers or something more serious, but it's hard to tell right now." Officer Kim added, "We'll keep an eye on the situation and increase patrols in the area. I know it's frightening, but try to stay calm. We'll make sure you're safe." Though grateful for their support, Kate still felt scared and uncertain. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What if he comes back? I don't know what to do." Don't worry, Rogers reassured her. "We'll do everything we can to keep you safe. We also recommend you keep your doors and windows locked and call us if you see anything suspicious." After the officers left their contact information and exited the house, Kate was left alone, with only her anxious dog Rex pacing around the house. The fear lingered, and she still felt vulnerable in her own home. The next morning, Kate woke up with a heavy sense of anxiety. The early morning was quiet and gray, and even the sunlight filtering through the curtains couldn't chase away her fear. She glanced at the clock and saw it was already late, but sleep had brought no relief. When Kate went downstairs, she found that her parents, Jim and Laura, had already returned home. They looked tired and worried after their evening out, which had been interrupted by Kate's phone call. Jim, with a serious expression on his face, said, "The police said they didn't find any new evidence beyond what we saw yesterday. No fingerprints, no tracks, nothing concrete. It seems like it was just a random visitor or maybe a prank by some teenagers." Kate felt her heart sink in disappointment. She had hoped the police would find something more, something to confirm her fears and help reveal what was really happening. Laura, still in her nightclothes, sat on a kitchen chair and sighed. "Maybe it really was just a coincidence," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain. "But still, we need to do something about the security." Kate looked at her with concern. "What if it's not just a coincidence? What if someone comes back? We don't know anything about what's going on." Kate's father appeared both worried and tense. "We went over everything with the police, but we don't have anything solid to go on. We've done what we can. Maybe we should think about installing extra cameras or a security system." Kate knew her parents might suggest this as peace of mind, but she was ready to do anything to feel safe. She didn't want to stay in this house feeling vulnerable. Later that day, after Jim and Laura left for work, Kate began her own investigation. She went over every possible place where something important might have been found. She noted that none of the windows or doors had been damaged, and she discovered there were no new tracks or prints around the property either. She called her school friend, Jack, and asked him to help her install extra locks and a security system. Jack was willing to help, and they spent the whole day installing new locks and checking every window and door. By the end of the day, when Jim and Laura came home, they saw the new locks and cameras around the house. Laura, with a concerned look, asked, "Do you really think this will help?" Kate nodded. "I just want to be sure that if someone tries to get in again, we'll notice and be able to protect ourselves. The police can keep investigating, but I don't want to just sit here waiting for something to happen." That evening, Kate and her parents gathered around the table. Laura said, "I hope that with these new security measures, we'll be safe. We just need to keep watching and hope for the best." Kate nodded, but the fear and doubt still lingered in her heart. Even though the new security system gave her a sense of protection, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real threat was still out there, unnoticed and ready to strike again. Kate and her parents were just starting to adapt to the new security measures when strange things began happening again. Unfamiliar cars started appearing in the neighborhood, parking near houses but never staying long. These cars were of different makes and colors, but they all shared one common trait: their drivers always left after a short time, never lingering in the area for too long. One evening, as Kate sat by the window reviewing footage from the cameras, she noticed one of these cars stop at the intersection across from their house. It was an old silver sedan with tinted windows. The car idled there for only a few minutes before driving away quickly. Kate felt her anxiety rise. She knew this wasn't just a random occurrence. When her parents came home from work, Kate couldn't help but share her observations. She told them about the strange cars that had begun appearing in their neighborhood. Jim, after a long day at work, looked tired and irritated, but he still listened to his daughter. "Maybe it's just random traffic, Kate," he said with a hint of weariness in his voice. "These days, people drive through neighborhoods to check things out or meet friends." But Laura, less confident than her husband, looked at her daughter with concern. "Maybe Kate is right. I've noticed strange things happening around here too. We need to be careful." Night fell, and Kate found herself sitting by the window again, scanning the street. Suddenly, she noticed another car, a black SUV, pull up to the house across the street. The driver didn't get out but just sat there, staring out the window. Kate's heart raced. She decided to jot down the license plate number and took a few pictures. The next day, when Kate shared her new observations with her parents, Jim decided to call the police. He explained that his daughter had noticed suspicious cars and wanted to make sure it wasn't connected to her recent experiences. The police promised to conduct an additional investigation but reminded Jim that situations like these aren't always quickly resolved. The officers warned him that it could take several days to figure out what was going on. Kate and her parents felt even more vulnerable. Laura suggested installing a few more cameras around the perimeter of the house and adding extra security features. Though Jim remained skeptical, he agreed, understanding that the family's safety had to come first. Over the next few days, Kate continued watching the street and documenting any suspicious activity. Each new appearance of an unknown car added to her growing sense of unease. She reviewed camera footage and took notes, hoping to spot some kind of pattern. One day, while sitting by the window and going over the footage, Kate saw the black SUV pull up to the house across the street again. The driver, once again, didn't get out, but this time Kate noticed something different. He took several pictures of the house across the street. This made her heart pound even faster. Kate immediately called the police and reported the new development. The police assured her they would continue their investigation, but once again warned that getting concrete results could take time. Kate and her parents remained on high alert, realizing that their house might be under surveillance and that the real threat could be much closer than they thought. On Saturday morning, Kate noticed the dogs barking at the back window again, just like they had on the night when it all began. Her heart started pounding when she saw fresh footprints in the backyard once more. These prints were clearly new and led toward the old shed that sat in the corner of their property. Gathering her courage, Kate decided to investigate what was going on. She grabbed a flashlight and her phone in case she needed help. Before stepping outside, she checked the camera footage several times to ensure there was no one suspicious in the yard. As Kate approached the shed, she noticed that the door, which was usually kept closed, was slightly ajar. Inside, it was dim, and the old wooden beams creaked under her steps. Breathing heavily from both excitement and fear, Kate aimed the flashlight deeper into the shed. There, among the dust-covered objects like old tools and boxes, Kate noticed a few strange things. On the floor lay an old reel of film, clearly used for recording. There were also torn pieces of paper scattered about, covered in strange symbols and handwritten notes. One note listed her home's address, along with cryptic phrases like, "Come at the designated time," and "Leave no traces." Kate also found several plastic bags containing scraps of clothing. These pieces of fabric resembled the ones she had seen in the suspicious cars. One of them even had the same dark color. Kate immediately took photos of these discoveries and documented everything she found. After gathering her thoughts, Kate decided it was time to hand over this evidence to the police. She returned to the house and called 911 to report the findings. Officers arrived quickly and began inspecting the shed. "This could be related to your previous observations," one of the officers said as they examined the area. "We'll check these items and try to trace them to someone. For now, stay alert and report any new suspicious events." Over the next few days, Kate and her family remained on high alert. Each day, the fear and uncertainty only grew. Kate waited anxiously for the police to share any new findings. But they continued to search for clues and test their theories. The grim discoveries in the shed, along with the strange signs, only reinforced Kate's belief that her home had become the center of some hidden threat that needed to be uncovered. After Kate discovered the strange clues in the shed, her anxiety reached a new level. Deciding she needed more information, she resolved to speak with the neighbors. Hoping to learn more about what might be happening around the neighborhood, Kate went for a walk through the area. The weather was cool, and the street was quiet, disturbed only by the occasional passing car. Kate approached the house of her elderly neighbor, Mr. Thomas, who often sat on his porch chatting with other residents. "Hello, Mr. Thomas," she began, trying to hide her nervousness. "I'd like to talk to you about what's been happening in our neighborhood. Have you heard anything about strange events or suspicious people?" Mr. Thomas set aside his newspaper and looked at her with a concerned expression. "Oh, Kate, you wouldn't believe it, but there've been some strange things happening around here the past couple of weeks. My wife and I had some vandalism, graffiti on the fence, streetlights getting broken. And recently, our neighbor George reported that his tools went missing from his garage." Kate felt her heart beat faster. "Do you think this could be part of something bigger?" "I'm not sure," Mr. Thomas replied. "But George said he's seen some suspicious cars around. He even mentioned someone trying to get close to his house late at night. Maybe it's the same people causing trouble for you." Kate thanked him and headed over to George's house. George was a young guy who worked at a local repair shop. He greeted her with some skepticism but eventually agreed to talk. "My tools went missing, and I thought it was just a random theft," he told her. "But now, hearing about your issues, I'm starting to think there might be a connection. My friends have also noticed some suspicious cars in the area, but they couldn't give any specifics." Kate took note of all the details and continued her search. She also spoke with other neighbors and learned that several minor thefts and acts of vandalism had occurred in the neighborhood over the past few weeks. People were concerned, but most hadn't connected the incidents. After gathering this information, Kate returned home and discussed everything with her parents. They were shocked at how widespread the problem might be. It became clear that their home, and the entire neighborhood, could be at risk. Kate called the police again to report her findings. The officers she spoke with confirmed that they had already begun collecting information about suspicious events in the area, but so far, there were no concrete leads. "We'll continue looking into this," one of the officers promised. "Thank you for your help. If you find anything else, please let us know right away." Kate felt a mix of relief and worry. On one hand, she now had more information about what might be happening in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, her fear and unease only grew stronger. The surveillance footage was usually mundane: passers-by, cars driving by, and neighbors out for walks. But one day, Kate noticed something suspicious captured during the night, when the streets were empty. In the video, at 2 a.m., two figures were seen walking down the alley behind the backyard. They moved slowly and cautiously, occasionally stopping and looking around. At one point, one of them approached the back window and seemed to examine it closely. Kate zoomed in on the image and noticed that the faces of the people were hidden under hoods and dark clothing. They looked like ordinary passers-by, but their behavior betrayed their intentions. They paused near the shed that Kate had recently investigated, surveying it. Then, without any obvious action, they returned to the alley and disappeared into the darkness. Kate saved these clips and immediately showed them to her parents. Jim and Laura were shocked. "These aren't just regular passers-by," Jim said as he watched the footage. "They're clearly looking for something, and this can't be a coincidence." Kate decided it was necessary to hand over the footage to the police. The next day, she loaded all the videos onto a flash drive and went to the station. After reviewing the recordings, the officers noted that the individual's behavior was indeed suspicious, but there were no clear clues that could identify them. "We'll keep monitoring the situation," the officer said, "and we'll thoroughly investigate any new leads. Thank you for providing this footage. It could be important for our investigation." As Kate headed home, she felt a slight sense of relief that her actions were contributing to the case, but she also realized that the situation was far from resolved. Her fears that someone might be watching her house had only deepened. Kate noticed that her brother Jake, who had always been close to the family and reliable, had started acting very strangely. Over the past few weeks, his behavior had become increasingly concerning. Jake often came home late at night and gave evasive answers when asked where he had been. Sometimes, he would leave without explanation and wouldn't answer his phone. One evening, when Kate saw Jake leaving the house after dark, she decided it was time to figure out what was really going on. His actions were too suspicious to ignore, and her instincts told her it was connected to the current situation. She had to uncover the truth. That night, when Jake left again in his car, Kate quickly got ready and decided to follow him. She hoped it would help her understand where he was spending his time and what was really happening. She dressed inconspicuously and quietly followed Jake in her modest sedan, keeping a safe distance. At first, Jake drove along the main streets, but soon turned onto a dimly lit road that led to an industrial area on the outskirts of town. Kate tried not to lose sight of him, only using her high beams when absolutely necessary to avoid drawing attention. Stopping at the edge of a parking lot, Kate watched as Jake parked his car near an old warehouse. She parked a short distance away and observed him. Jake entered the building, and Kate could see a faint light inside. She decided to get closer to see what was happening. Sneaking up to a warehouse window, Kate saw Jake and a few other men, who looked like workers, engaged in a serious discussion. Using her phone, she discreetly took some photos, trying to capture any details that might help later. Jake seemed deeply involved in the conversation and was actively participating. Kate couldn't make out what they were talking about, but she saw suspicious-looking bags and boxes among the men. Once the meeting ended, Jake got back into his car and drove off. Kate decided not to follow him further and returned home, anxious about what she had just witnessed. She uploaded the pictures to her computer and decided to show them to her parents. When Jim and Laura saw the photos, they were shocked. Laura frowned as she looked at the images. "I never thought Jake could be involved in something suspicious." Quote. Jim, as usual, was more reserved, but his face showed concern. "We need to talk to him," he said. "Maybe he's in trouble or has fallen under bad influence. But we also need to be careful not to jump to conclusions." Kate agreed with her father. She knew the conversation with Jake had to be handled delicately, so as not to alarm him and possibly make the situation worse. That evening, despite her inner anxiety, she decided to wait for the right moment to talk to her brother, hoping that her doubts would either be dispelled or, unfortunately, confirmed. A few days had passed since Kate had followed Jake. During that time, she noticed something even more troubling. Small items, like chargers, jewelry, and even a couple of books, had started disappearing from the house. At first, Kate thought it might be her own forgetfulness or her mother, Laura, accidentally misplacing things. However, when the disappearances became more frequent, she realized there was something more to it. Her concern grew when she saw Jake leaving the house late at night again. This time, he was carrying a large duffel bag that looked suspiciously heavy. Kate noticed the bag was tightly zipped, but some items were peeking out from under the zipper. Kate decided it was time to take action. That night, after Jake left, she made up her mind to conduct her own investigation. Trying to stay quiet and not draw attention, Kate entered Jake's room. She knew it was risky, but her fear of losing more things outweighed her hesitation. Jake's room was a mess, which was typical for a teenager. But Kate noticed that some of the missing items could possibly be there. She quickly glanced over his desk and shelves, searching for anything that might confirm her suspicions. Under one of the couch cushions, she found a few small objects that matched the ones that had disappeared from the house. Shortly after, she heard the sound of a car, and Kate realized Jake was returning home. She quickly went back to her room and tried to act as if nothing had happened. The next day, when Jake left again, Kate decided to check the duffel bag he had left in his room. She quickly found a way to unzip it, and to her horror, she saw several of the missing items inside. She even found her own watch, which she had thought was lost forever. Kate was in complete shock at what she had discovered. The realization that her brother might be involved in stealing hit her hard. She felt that she could no longer ignore the situation and decided that she needed to seek help. When Jim and Laura returned home, Kate gathered all her courage and told them everything that had happened. She showed her parents the items from Jake's bag and explained that she had seen Jake leaving the house at night. Laura was stunned and began to cry, while Jim looked deeply concerned. "We need to talk to him," Jim said, trying to remain calm. "This will be a difficult conversation, but we can't just ignore it. If Jake is in trouble, we need to understand what's going on and try to help him." Kate and her parents, Jim and Laura gathered in the living room, preparing for the difficult conversation with Jake. Kate was on the verge of tears from anxiety and fear for her brother. Jim, though trying to remain calm, was concerned, unsure how Jake would react to their accusations. When Jake returned home, he saw the tense faces of his parents and sister. A sense of unease stirred within him, but he was ready for this conversation. Laura, gathering her courage, began. "Jake, we found some things that have gone missing from the house." "Kate discovered them in your bag," she started, her voice trembling. Jake flushed and looked down. He knew he had nothing left to hide. His shoulders slumped, and with a heavy sigh, he sat down on the couch. I need to explain everything," he said, his voice filled with torment. "I was forced to work with a group involved in criminal activity. They threatened me and my friends if I didn't carry out their orders." Kate flinched. "But why didn't you tell us? We could have helped in some way." Jake looked up at his sister with regret. "I was afraid that if I told you, they might hurt you. I thought I could handle it myself. But I was wrong." Jim, trying to keep his emotions in check, asked, "What exactly were you doing for this group?" Jake nervously fidgeted with his fingers. "I had to steal things, like you saw, and sometimes I helped them with vandalism. It all started when they found me at the wrong time and place. They made me part of it." Laura gritted her teeth, her eyes filling with tears. "But how could we not notice? Why didn't you come to us for help?" Jake sighed, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I thought I could handle it. I was naive. I didn't know what to do. Now I realize how wrong I was. These people made my life a nightmare." Kate stepped forward. "Jake, we can try to help you, but we need to cooperate with the police. We need to know how we can protect ourselves and stop these people." Jim nodded. "We have to contact the police and tell them everything. If your testimony can help catch these criminals, it will be better for everyone." Jake looked at them with a mix of guilt and relief. "I'm ready to cooperate with the police. I need this to end. I can't live in fear anymore and be part of this. I want to make it right." Laura, sobbing, hugged Jake. "We'll do everything we can to help you and to ensure our family's safety. We have to do this." They all understood that a difficult path lay ahead, but they were ready to face it together. The secrets that Kate's brother had kept hidden were now part of an official investigation. Police officers arrived at the house, and the inquiry quickly took a serious turn. Officers Davis and Hart reviewed the surveillance footage and interviewed Kate. Following this, they had a conversation with Jake, who was now ready to cooperate with law enforcement, hoping for understanding and support. The officers brought Jake to the precinct for questioning. He sat at the table, breathing heavily. The officers began with questions about his nighttime outings and the stolen items. Jake explained how he had been forced to work for a criminal group and how he carried out their tasks to protect himself and his friends. Officer Davis asked politely but firmly, "Jake, how serious was your involvement with this group? What crimes did you commit?" Jake swallowed hard. "We were involved in thefts and occasionally vandalism. I know it was terrible. I did it to avoid bringing even more wrath upon myself and my friends. But, to be honest, I wasn't just a pawn, I was part of their plan." Officer Hart took notes, observing Jake closely. "You mentioned being under pressure. Can you tell us what exactly they threatened you with?" Jake nodded. "They threatened my family, my friends, and even me. They knew where we lived and what mattered to us. It was a game of fear. I felt trapped and didn't know how to escape." His testimony matched many details that the police already had. It soon became clear that Jake was not just a random figure in this story. He was involved in more serious crimes than could have been expected. Jake pointed out where the group stored the stolen items and identified locations where their operations took place. All this indicated that he was indeed part of an organized crime ring. Based on his testimony, the police began investigative actions to locate other members of the group and find their hideout. They confirmed that the criminal organization had been using Jake for their operations and started preparing for arrests. As the investigation continued, Kate and her parents, despite their anxiety, felt that at least part of the problem was being addressed. Jake, although implicated in serious crimes, was now actively helping the police, hoping to lessen his culpability through cooperation. Officer Davis approached Kate and her parents to share the latest updates. "We know this is a difficult time for you, but your assistance and Jake's information have significantly expedited our investigation. We're confident that we will soon be able to arrest everyone involved with this group. Kate, still worried about her brother, felt relief that steps were being taken to ensure their safety. Nevertheless, she understood that there was still much work ahead and that the real struggle for their peace of mind was just beginning. The investigation was gaining momentum, and soon the police began to unravel the complex links between Jake's actions and a more dangerous drug trafficking organization. The work of officers Davis and Hart led to unexpected discoveries that shed light on the true reasons behind the threats directed at Kate. After questioning Jake and analyzing the evidence, officers Davis and Hart focused their investigation on the broader context of the criminal activity associated with the group to which Jake belonged. They uncovered that the criminal organization employed various intimidation tactics to control its members and their surroundings. Primarily, they found that the criminals were trying to create an atmosphere of fear around Kate and her family to ensure that Jake wouldn't dare cooperate with law enforcement. Officer Davis gathered his team and shared important news with Kate. "Kate, we've discovered that your family was not a random target. We found that your safety was at risk because of Jake's connections with a drug trafficking organization. These people used threats and intimidation to control Jake and ensure he carried out their orders." Kate, sitting in the interrogation room with her parents, felt her tension ease slightly, but she remained cautious. "So this was all related to drugs? Why did they choose us?" Officer Hart continued, "Yes, the group used intimidation tactics to keep Jake under control. We found that they tried to create a sense of threat and instability to keep him dependent on their directives. The police conducted further investigations and discovered that the group planned to use Jake for drug delivery and other illegal activities. Surveillance footage revealed that the suspicious individuals watching Kate's house were actually lookouts for the group, tasked with monitoring the execution of their orders." "So this was all because of Jake and his connections to these people?" "Yes," confirmed Officer Davis. "The group wanted to create a sense of danger to keep Jake under control. Now that we've figured this out, we can take measures to ensure your safety and put an end to this group's activities." The officers reassured Kate and her parents that they would continue working on the case and ensure their safety. They proposed increasing police presence in the neighborhood and maintaining surveillance on potential connections between Jake and the criminal organization. As events unfolded, Kate and her family began to feel that, although much work lay ahead, they were on the right path to restoring normalcy and securing their safety. The night was quiet, and Kate finally felt a sense of relief after the recent turmoil. She lay in bed, hoping for a peaceful sleep, but in the middle of the night, she was suddenly awakened by loud noises coming from downstairs. Kate's heart raced as she listened to the increasingly louder and more persistent sounds. She got out of bed and cautiously crept to her bedroom door, trying to make no noise. The dogs, Rex and Lily, who were usually calm, began barking and whimpering, their reactions anxious and tense. Kate peered into the darkness, straining to hear the noise, which now sounded like loud banging and muffled creaks. Realizing that someone was trying to break into the house, she immediately returned to her room, grabbed her phone, and dialed 911. "Help! Someone is trying to enter the house." Her voice was filled with panic. The 911 operator was hard to hear, but she managed to give her address and describe the situation. Meanwhile, the noise on the first floor grew even louder. Kate heard someone forcefully trying to break down the back door, followed by footsteps moving around the house. Fear overwhelmed her, and she quickly locked her bedroom door, trying to make no sound. The footsteps continued to move through the house, and Kate, sitting in the dark, struggled to control her breathing. Seconds felt like an eternity until, finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Police were on their way. Kate heard the doors and locks rattle downstairs, followed by the quick steps of police officers checking the premises. A few minutes later, she recognized the calming voice of one of the officers assuring her that the house was safe. When the police entered and conducted a search, they discovered signs of forced entry on the back door and other doors that appeared to have been tampered with by the intruders. Officer Davis turned to Kate. "Kate, we found evidence of a break-in. We also collected several clues that will assist us in the investigation. You did well to call the police so quickly." Kate emerged from her room, trembling from the fear she had experienced. "I heard someone moving through the house. I was so scared." Her voice shook, and she struggled to contain her emotions. Officer Davis continued, "We will increase our presence in the area and do everything possible to catch those responsible." The most important thing is that you and your family are safe. We'll gather evidence and take all necessary measures to resolve this incident. The police spent some more time in the house, taking photographs and collecting evidence. Kate and her family could only wait while the investigators finished their work. Despite everything that had happened, Kate felt that her family's safety was still at risk and realized there was much work ahead to restore their normal life. When the police finally left, the family sat together in the living room, tense and discussing the incident. Despite their fatigue and anxiety, they knew they had to remain cautious and ready for any further actions to protect their home and themselves. Several days had passed since Kate and her family endured the nighttime attack. The police continued their investigation, and each day brought new developments in their neighborhood. The nervous anticipation and sense of uncertainty lingered, but new information began to instill hope. One day, as Kate sat at the table, her father Jim entered the kitchen with a serious expression. "Kate, I have news. The police have arrested several people. They say it's connected to our recent troubles." Kate felt her heart race. "What does that mean? Who are these people?" Jim took a deep breath and explained. "The officers said they've arrested several teenagers and some members of the criminal group. It seems they were linked to a series of crimes in our area, including the recent threats and attempts at intimidation." The police organized a press conference to announce the details of the investigation. Journalists, Kate's neighbors, and Kate with her parents were all present. Officer Davis, the same one who had been assisting with the case, spoke before the cameras. "Today, we apprehended several individuals who were found to be part of a group involved in drug trafficking and other crimes. Their actions included extortion and intimidation of local residents to control them and force their cooperation." As Kate listened, her fear gradually shifted to relief. Although she still felt unsettled and anxious, the understanding that her family had not been specifically targeted as victims brought her a measure of comfort. After the press conference, the police continued their investigations and increased security measures in the area. Kate and her family felt more protected, though the nighttime fears and stress had not completely dissipated. They began to return to normal life, knowing that while the danger was not entirely eradicated, it was now under the authorities' control. Soon, as Kate looked at her family and their home, she realized that the most important thing was supporting one another during difficult times. She understood that her family would work together to restore a sense of safety and calm. Though the wounds from the fear they had experienced were still fresh, Kate recognized that true strength lay not just in laws and police but also in the family standing together through any situation. Several weeks had passed since the arrests, and Kate's life began to return to normal. The police continued their investigation, and this time, Jake, Kate's brother, played a key role in unraveling the criminal organization. His cooperation with the police became a crucial factor in exposing the entire scheme. One morning, Jake approached their parents with important news. He looked excited yet determined. "I need to talk to you and Kate. The police want to hold another meeting to discuss details. I've been helping them uncover what was behind all of this." In the evening, after Kate and her parents gathered in the living room, Detective Martin arrived with important updates. He sat down on the couch and began to speak. "Jake provided us with key information about the criminal organization behind everything. We conducted a thorough investigation and found that their operations were significantly more complex than we initially thought." Kate and her parents listened intently as the detective continued. "This group used intimidation as a means of manipulation. They employed threats and committed acts of vandalism not only to control their victims but also to divert attention from their more serious crimes. They were involved in drug trafficking and organized thefts to finance their activities." Jake added, "I was part of this group because they threatened me and my loved ones. My job was to keep an eye on potential victims and create chaos so their operations went unnoticed. I realized that this group used fear as a weapon to manipulate and protect their interests." Detective Martin interjected, "We have now dismantled the entire network and arrested all key members of the organization. We will also continue working to ensure that no other groups can harm people in this area. Your cooperation has been vital for us, and we appreciate your patience and support." After the meeting, Jake and Kate spent time discussing what had transpired. Jake apologized to his sister for all the difficulties they had endured and promised to do everything he could to make amends. Kate and her family felt that this ordeal had become an important lesson. They had regained a sense of security, And although the fears and anxieties were still fresh, they understood that they had grown stronger through their support for one another and the fact that the truth had finally come to light. Months had passed since Kate and her family weathered the storm involving the criminal organization. The arrests and exposure of the intimidation scheme that had caused their fear brought much-needed relief. Now that life was gradually returning to normal, Kate and her family were striving to restore their usual routine. On a Saturday morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, Kate and her parents sat at the kitchen table, having breakfast and discussing their plans for the day. Laura, sitting by the window, noticed their neighbor going out for a morning jog. "Look, people are starting to return to their normal lives," she said with a smile. Jim, pouring himself a cup of coffee, added, "I hope we can regain our sense of security too. We just need to stay vigilant and remember that even after all these events, it's important not to forget about safety precautions." Despite the return to normalcy, Kate felt a constant sense of alertness. She began attending community meetings with neighbors, discussing safety issues and supporting one another. She also built a relationship with the police, staying informed about potential threats and updates in the area. One evening, as Kate walked through the garden, her eyes lingered on the recently renovated shed, which now looked much better. "While we were fixing the shed, I realized how important it is to strengthen not only the walls but also our inner peace," she reflected. Noticing her contemplation, Kate's parents came over and hugged her. "We got through this together. And although we faced tough times, we made our home better and safer," Laura said. "Yeah, that's true," Kate agreed, smiling. "But let's remember that real threats can be closer than they seem. Staying alert is part of how we care for each other." The family continued their usual activities and maintained close ties with their neighbors, which helped reinforce their sense of security. Life was gradually returning to normal, but Kate and her parents remained attentive to the world around them, understanding that readiness and vigilance were key to peace of mind.